Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to show you an exciting game from 1995. This game took place in the capital, uh, actually in Slovenia, but Ljubljana is the capital. And for those of you who are interested, that's about a 6 hour time difference from if you live on the east coast of the United States. So let's see, right now as I'm making this video, it's about what time is it? 12:15, so it's 6:15 over there. So I think I got the math right. Anyway, this game is between a prominent trainer and very strong player, uh, uh, Leonid Yudasin with the white pieces, and Mr. Fire on board himself, Alexey Shirov with the black pieces. This game again is from 1995. Shirov was 23 years old at the time and very much in the prime of his career. He was number 2 in the world in 1994. Under 16 world champ in 1988. Under 20 world champ in 1990. Or co-champ. Okay, losing on tie breaks to Ilya Gorovich. Grandmaster in 1990. 1998, number 4 in the world, and actually played a match to play for the world title against Gary Kasparov by defeating Kramnik. If you're interested in that controversy about him possibly being robbed of a title shot, check out my video on my playlist about Alexey Shirov. So Shirov has had a fantastic career. So I recommend studying his games if you like players like Tal and players that like to throw the pieces everywhere. Study Shirov. Uh, Unfortunately for him, his major nemesis and blemish on his record would always be his encounters with Gary Kasparov. They played about 30 games, and he never beat Kasparov one game. He has about 15 losses, and the rest just being draws. And that definitely had something to do with him not being able to get that title shot. Uh, Now, many of you know about Shirov. Let me tell you something about Yudasin. First of all, he still lives in New York City. He plays every now and then, uh, but he mostly concentrates on training now. Great coach. Yudasin's a little older. He was born in 1959. Um, he was IM in 1982. So he wasn't like these young prodigies of today, getting the IM title, soon as they, hop out of the baby seat. He, he was like in his 20s. He became an international master in 1982, grandmaster in 1984, Leningrad champion. Then he was in 1990 the Russian champion, co-Russian champion with Belyavsky, Barayev, and Vizmanovin. He was a candidate in 1991, number 5 in the world at the time. That was like his peak rating. He lost in the candidates to young Ivanchuk, and we already know how Ivanchuk's career went, so no shame in losing to Ivanchuk. And in 1994, he was a candidate again and lost to Kramnik. And again, Kramnik wound up becoming world champion. So again, no shame in that. So here's a game where these two clashed in 1995. Enjoy. Yudasin started out with e4, c5 from Shirov, knight f3, d6, and bishop b5. This is known as the Moscow variation, and I think I've explained this before. All of the openings, basically, when the Russians started dominating chess, the Russians basically either named or renamed like all of the openings. So some of these openings might have different names depending on what country you came from. But since the Russians dominated chess at the time, this is called known as the so-called Moscow opening, and falls under the category of an anti-Sicilian, whereby white often chooses to try to avoid some of the bishop d7. Knight c6 is also an option that is played And sample line, goes somewhat like this. White basically has two main ideas. One is the one you see here, to build the center with C3 and D4. Okay, and the second idea is to try to set up a Marazzi bind with the pawns on C4 and E4. Okay, those are the two ideas that are used most often. Then there's some other tertiary ideas involving the move B3 and D3. But all in all, those latter variations aren't as critical. But it serves the purpose of avoiding preparation and just getting a decent position whereby you can outplay your opponent. So back to our game, after bishop b5 by Yudasin, Shirov played bishop d7. Bishops were exchanged, and knight d7. Also playable is the move queen d7. You can have a similar idea again. This idea was c3. Okay, but bishop d7 and knight takes d7 was played. Now queen d7 is played if you have the idea you want to put the knight on c6, of course. Right? It all depends on your what you're trying to do. Okay, so bishop takes d7, knight takes d7, castle, and you can see the play is real simple and straightforward from white. Knight g6, attacking the e pawn, and now queen e2. And like I told you, white either plays c3 or c4, or sometimes he goes for one of these other plans with a simple d3 or b3. e6, and here Yudasin plays b3. So now the cards are on the table, and we know that he's probably going to fianchetto his bishop on b2, attacking black on the dark squares. Bishop e7, bishop b2 by Yudasin, castle by Shirov, and now c4. So we see this combination of plans. So now we have this Marazzi bind mixed with this plan with the bishop ending them on b2. Now already is a critical time in the game for black, because with the Marazzi bind, although black is not immediately in trouble, you have to black has to be very careful not to just get squeezed positionally. As you can see, white has more space on the board, and black's pieces, although they are developed, sit in a cramped state right now, and you don't want to be in that situation for too long. Eventually, if white is allowed to have his way, white will play d4 and try to open up the d file and double up his rooks, possibly the queen on the d file, and put tremendous pressure on the e pawn. That's one of the on the d pawn. That's one of the to set up for a kingside attack later on with moves like f4, f5, etc. So the space gives white a lot of options. So black has to fight against the space, trying to often break the bind with moves like a6 and b5. Sometimes d5 is organized. Even the move f5 in some lines. All right. So the idea for black is to try to break this bind. Here, Shirov makes a positional error in trying to blunt the bishop on b2 and keep white from playing d4 himself. He decides to set up this reverse kind of Botvinnik stonewall setup, and the problem is that white will be able to gain access and control over d5 before black is able to get established on d4. Now, Kashirov's vision is eventually to get a knight to d4. And if white has his knight on d5 and say both of them are able to be exchanged, it's not going to be really a big deal positionally. But let's see what happens. Better for black is to be a little more patient. Possibly move like a6 or queen b6 perhaps. Let's say knight c3, a6, rook a d1, And just hold on a little bit here. Just be a little patient. Okay. Say knight takes f3, queen takes f3, knight d7, and finally there's d4. And yes, white has a little bit of pressure, but and there's the pressure I was talking about on the d pawn, but black is still fine. And matter of fact, in this position, black can play this move b5. Okay, fighting against the Marazzi bind, as we said, in black is just equal here. So instead, the young Shirov played this move e5. Yudasin immediately plays knight c3, and the idea is eventually to post a piece on d5, but not yet. Knight e8 from Shirov, and his idea here is to maneuver his knight into d4. He wants to play knight c7, knight e6, and d4. Of course, this takes time. Knight e1 from Yudasin. So he's doing the same thing, but his pieces are better positioned right now. For instance, he already has a knight on c3, and he wants to take his other knight on e1 and go c2, e3, and now he has both of his knights ready, so that if one is swapped off, he can just put the other in there. Whereas Shirov does not have the same option. He only could get one knight in there at this point. So knight c7, knight c2, and now bishop g5. And this is a theme you see in many Sveshnikov games. And the idea is to get rid of this bad bishop for one of these good knights. You see the pawns are all on the dark squares. And so you trade off the bishop for one of these knights to lessen or weaken white's influence over the d5 square. Knight e3. And now knight f6 by Shirov. And of course, knight f6 helps to slow down the occupation here. So, for instance, now if knight cd5, it would be harmless, as just some simple trades would take place. 5, knight takes d5, and big deal. E takes d5, and now black can think about expressing himself on the king side with his majority by playing f5 and looking forward to a middle game attack, whereas white would try to push his pawns on the other side of the board. All right, and this is not what white signed up for. So knight f6, guarding d5, and now g3. This forces Shirov to act, because f4 is on the table, driving this bishop back. Shirov plays knight e6, knight e6. And now we see the idea of jumping into d4. Queen d3. So the queen is moved into safety. Queen d7. Knight c d. So when the cat's away, the mice will play. So Shirov has weakened his protection over d5, and Yudasin just jumps right in. Now Shirov goes with his plan and plays bishop takes e3. Now this weakens the Yudasin's effect. But now if Yudasin just say he fell asleep at the board and he just played this move right here, d takes e3, then Shirov will be okay after knight takes d5, and c takes d5 is possible. But let's say he just want, the best move positionally is to keep the d file open so that you can attack this backward pawn. But Shirov should be all right, as he could defend this pawn adequately enough. It's hard for black to bring enough pressure to bear on the d6 pawn. Like for instance, rook a d1. White has his work cut out from him. White would have to come up with another weakness in the position. Rook d2, you could try to double up. But white would need some more distraction for black in order to really make something out of this, because as it stands, white can pile up against the D pawn, but black has enough defenders. So for example, 98, for example, and then you're at a standstill. So back to the game. So bishop takes E3. However, we see that now the knight is left uh, in a kind of semi-unprotected state, and Yudasin changes the pawn structure here and plays knight takes F6, G takes F6, and this creates some more weakness in the black position. As you can see, the square F5 now, along with D5, uh, being added to the list of weaknesses. And then now, after this move, we can say that white is better because black has lost his outpost. So after F takes E3, this stops this idea that Shirov had earlier of being able to drop his knights in. And interesting enough, with this queen on D3, it actually keeps keeps black honest here and having to guard this pawn. Queen E7, as this pawn was actually attacked on F6. Rook F2. So now the play simplifies dramatically as the plans for white becomes real clear. It's basically doubling up and attacking the weaknesses. So now you have a second weakness here, and Yudasin goes after it. So knight C7 is played, and again this is a defensive maneuver. The idea is to bring the knight to E8. So rook AF1, right, win the pawn. Knight E8. So the pawn is protected, but the D6 and F6 pawns are protected, but now Shirov is forced to be passive, which is no good, especially for a player like Shirov. Queen E2, simply transferring over, planning the transfer to the king side, excuse me. King H8 now. And now bishop c3. This is a good instructive moment right here. If you look at white's pieces, the worst piece in this position is probably his dark squared bishop. Just because it's just blocked off by these dark squared pawns on e5 and f6. And d6 also fortifies the complex there. So although it would be nice to have some type of breakthrough there, it's not realistic. So Yudasin just decides to break with b4 and improve this bishop somewhat. And this also applies to what we mentioned earlier about the principle of two weaknesses. Right now, although white has done a good job in outplaying black, and black's position is compromised, there's no clear win here yet. So white still has to work and provoke more weaknesses in the black camp. So rook g8 is played, and Shirov is trying to take lemons and make lemonade. So his g file has been ripped open, so he decides to try to use the g file, and white's weakened kingside pawn structure to initiate a counterattack on the king side himself. b4, b6, b takes c5, b takes c5. Perhaps d takes c5 is a little better, right? Eliminating that weak backward pawn. Okay. Now perhaps Shirov was worried about taking the more reinforcements away from that e5 pawn, just in case there was a sacrifice or something that might take place on f6, or even a possible breakthrough with d4, and then this bishop could possibly get really strong. So Shirov keeps everything boxed up in the center with b takes c5. This gives white another opportunity now. Now white has the open b file, which again he wouldn't have had if d takes c5 had been played. So b takes c5 can be looked at as a probably a minor error. So rook b1, rook g6, and now you see this move queen d3. All right, very interesting maneuvers here with this pawn here and this pawn here, and how uh, it's not really right. It's almost like a closed D file, but uh, white is using it to put pressure on the black position. H5. So the idea is real simple. Play H3, open up the king side and try to counterattack. Queen D5 by white, gaining a tempo against the rook, and um, also creating an opportunity to penetrate with the rook to the 7th rank. Rook D8, and now his idea is that, if rook B7, then he'll defend with rook D7. So first, Yudasin improves his worst piece, which was that bishop. Okay, it's a small diagonal, but nevertheless, it's an open diagonal. With rook D7, and now the rook penetrates to the back rank. So now rook G8 has to be played by Shirov. If he tries to continue along with this plan H4, then white simply plays rook F5 with the idea of rook H5 check. So for example, H takes G3, rook H5 check, king G7, queen A8, double attacking the knight, and now the knight cannot move. G takes H2 check, and just simply king takes H2, and now black is lost. There's no defense to the knight here or the king, and there's no attack either. So Shirov has to go back and defend this knight. Rook G8, queen A8, just piling up more. So this paralyzes the black pieces. The knight cannot move off the back rank, and neither can the rook. King H7. Now rook F5, real simple play. And again, appreciate the build-up during the game, right? Weaknesses in the black position, all provoked by white. Right. First, he tried to fight against the D5 square. Then that turned into him creating a weakness on F6. He doubled up on F6. It didn't work. Then he wound up provoking black into allowing them to open the B file. And now look at all the pieces that have benefited as a result of that open B file. And now that he's exploited the B file to its fullest capacity, now he plays the move rook F5, and now he's attacking another weakness, which is the H5 pawn, but more importantly, the king on H7. King, the H6, what else? King F2, that's taking some time to protect the king. Now, Shirov plays the move Queen E6. The threat from black is this move right here, Bishop D8. And after Queen E6, then just Bishop takes F6. And this is all based on the paralyzed nature of these pieces. So for example, if Knight takes F6, then just Rook takes G8. And let's do it. Knight takes G8. Queen takes G8. And black is totally busted in this position. After, for instance, Queen G5 check is coming shortly. So Queen E6 is played first. And now Yudasin plays quiet move here, H3. Alright. This has some benefits. One is to keep the position closed. Say after a move like H4, you can just simply play G4. So it stalls any kind of black counterattack. Now Rook E7. Bishop D8 hitting the Rook. The Rook has to go back. And what Shirov was trying to do is free up his pieces by overprotection. But Yudasin doesn't give him the chance. He just plays Bishop D8. So rook d7 now, and now bishop takes f6. Black pieces are overworked, and so the bishop cannot be captured on f6. So now knight c7, and this is what Shirov was depending on. But black finds himself in a mating net here. Shirov plays rook takes g8 exclamation mark, giving up the queen. Knight takes, and now after the simple move g4, right, with threatening mate, just rook takes h5, h takes g4, and then simply rook takes g4. And there's no way that black can escape the tremendous loss of material in this position after, for example, bishop g7. All right, so just fantastic game. Let me just save that by Yudasin here. One of the players that again we're in the top, top ranks in the 90s, but you don't hear about too often. You more hear about Anand, Ivanchuk, Kramnik. Certainly brighter lights, but it's good to show games of players that don't really get credit where credit is due too often. I want to show you also that even in this position, let me just give you an example. Let's make it like just a random move. For instance, if knight b6, then mate is coming after bishop g7, king h7, rook h5, and let's say king g8, and then you can see clearly now the game could end like that. And also here is even a nice puzzle. Now g4 was played during the game, and of course that's the most practical. That's the easiest easiest line to see, just right over the board. But actually, there's a forced mate after rook takes h5. It's a mate in 6, and I'll show that to you. Rook takes h5, king takes h5, g4. The king is forced up, and of course queen takes 4 can be played, but we can see that just black is just clearly busted there. But king h6, and now rook h8. I'm sorry, g5 first, and let's say king h5, rook h8, king g6, and then just rook h6 mates. So a nice little mate, but you can see how it'd be hard to see that over the board, especially in time trouble. And that's one of those calculations that if you miss one small detail, you're down, you're just down a rook. Then there's this variation with queen takes g4, h takes g4, and black still gets mated. Rook h8 check, king g6, g5 with the same motif of rook mating on h6 after any black move here. Okay. But again, the game ended after g4, h takes g4, and rook takes g4, where Shirov resigned. So I hope you enjoyed that little trip in our time machine back to 1995. And please comment, like, and subscribe. And I will see you shortly on the next video.